Crossing Church, how you doing? You doing okay? Everybody all right? What a beautiful day. What an awesome day. Just to call yourself a Christian and to be in a relationship with Jesus Christ. I mean, that makes it all worth it. But I want to welcome everyone joining from other campuses. From 929, you guys rock that whole community, that whole world in so many different ways. And I'm just thankful for you. I'm thankful for what God is doing through you and in you and around you and the opportunities that you get to have. And Pittsfield, it's neat to see you ramping up on Sunday mornings. Just awesome to see how God is working in your life and seeing that harvest come in. And Hannibal, we're excited for you. Just what is going on with you. And I'm excited to unpack that to this body of believers and the rest of the body of believers as we move forward together to get you a permanent home, because you need one. I mean, you're just exploding. That's awesome. We want to welcome everyone in Macomb and all the things you're doing. And in Kirksville, I heard a small group got the police called on them this week. That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Because you had too many cars parked in the neighborhood. That's just incredible when small groups are just busting at the seams. You guys are doing great stuff. And I'm glad that we have this opportunity just to join together. We've been going on this journey together called The Next Step. And just to review quickly, we talk about or accepting Christ. That's what that stands for. It's about just coming into a relationship with Christ, being introduced to Christ and experiencing the massive change that only He can do. We talked about B, which means it stands for belong. And what we've learned through that is this is not a journey that you were ever designed to go on alone. This is something that we're supposed to do together in large groups and in small groups. We need to be in an intimate relationship with each other as we move into the direction of this intimate personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We talked about C, which means care. We grow into getting ourselves out of the center of our own lives. That's what that means. It's not about us anymore. It's about God and putting God where He belongs in the center. About loving Jesus by loving people. That's what C is all about. And this week we're going to talk about the end game. We're going to talk about the big goal. What is it that we're all about? It's about D, and that's disciple. Now, I want you to understand that if you've just accepted Christ, or you're thinking about accepting Christ, or you're just transitioning to what it means to be part of a body of people, to belong to that, or to move that center of gravity from yourself to God, that's fine. And I'm not expecting you to have all this D stuff down that I'm going to share with you today, like right away, all right? But it's good for you, even if you're not there yet, to kind of see ahead and what does that end game actually look like. So I want you to listen hard to what I'm going to be talking about, because this is where our goal is. This is who Jesus wants us to be, and I want to illustrate that for you in a way that we can all understand. This is how I'm going to do it. There was a time in my life when I was not interested in girls. Okay? Just going to be totally honest with you. There was a time in my life, I can't remember back that far, but I know it was back there. Okay? I remember when girls had cooties. Guys, how many of you remember when girls had cooties? Like if you touched them bad, I mean, no way. Recess, I'm with the boys. I'm not with the girls. You don't hang out with girls. You don't talk to girls. Just yuck. Don't want to be around girls. You remember that? And then something changed. Something changed. Kindergarten, man. I remember it changed in kindergarten because of Kathy Long. Wow, she was hot, all right, for a 5-year-old. And I really wanted to impress her. And it was weird because a lot of the guys that were in kindergarten with me, really, girls still had cooties. And so it was like forbidden, and I couldn't help it. I just thought she was really neat, and I liked her. But it was weird and it was awkward. And guys, my friends would go, "What are you doing? That's crazy. Yo, that's terrible." So I was interested, but I wouldn't want to talk to anybody else about it. Didn't want to admit that. I was so awkward and I was so inexperienced. But, that only was that way for a while. I got a little bit older. And then girls were a very cool thing for everybody. That was a guy, and started dating. And I remember when I did that, I had my standards. I mean, I would only date a girl if she was this, and this, and this, and this, and this, because had to fit my expectation of I was like shopping, it was like not you, not you. To find that one special girl that fit me, because it was all about me. And so when I took a girl out, it wasn't so much about impressing her. It was about I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to go see them. Why don't we go see the Terminator? That's romantic. Because I wanted to do what I wanted to do. It was all about what I liked. Then I met someone I really cared for. And it wasn't about dating anymore. It started to be about love. Things started changing. And it wasn't all about me, and it wasn't all about my agenda anymore. And I was trying to meet her needs, and I was trying to care for her. And I was seeing what she wanted to do. And I wanted to get in alignment with her. And you know what, when you start doing that, you know what's going to happen? You're going to get married. And that's what I did. I got married. I got married to the one that I really loved and I really cared for. And that was great. And then we had kids. And everything changed. Isn't that right? I mean, getting married is dating with benefits, right? I mean, getting married is like you don't have to, it's that wouldn't it be nice if we were, remember that? It was that. And all of a sudden, you have all that and it's awesome. And then all of a sudden, at 2 o'clock in the morning, everything changes. All your priorities. I used to be concerned about fashion. That was important to me. And then all of a sudden it didn't matter anymore. I mean, it's like everything took second place to raising those children. All the finances changed. I started driving a minivan, for goodness sake. It changed everything in my life. Am I connecting with anybody here? Getting married was like this much of a difference, and then having children was like that much of a difference. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, the Apostle Paul is talking about life, and he's talking about spiritual gifts, and he says this: when I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, I acted like a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. It means that everything was moving toward that. Now, I appreciate you putting up with my self-indulgence there, talking about me. But listen to what I want. I said that for this reason. There was a time when I was not interested in Jesus. And there was probably a time when you weren't. When you really weren't thinking about him, where that wasn't a priority in your life. It really wasn't even on your radar. But then something changed and an interest formed in your heart. But it was an odd kind of interest. It was the kind of interest that you really didn't want to talk to anybody else about, because you didn't want them to think that you were going off kind of some spiritual tangent or something like that. It was weird to talk to people about Jesus. You felt awkward and you felt inexperienced, but there was something in your heart that was pulling you in that direction. And then you grew a little more and you changed a little more, and you started to develop a faith in God and a relationship with Jesus Christ. But really, it was you that was at the center of your life and not him. You know what I mean? I mean, you had Jesus when he was when you felt like he was important or necessary, when you needed to pray a prayer or get one answered, or when you were looking for hope in a hopeless situation. You had him there, but he really wasn't in the place that he needed to be. But over sometimes, some of us have grown to the place where, you know what, we've realized that life just doesn't work very well when you stay in the center of your own universe. And that needs to change. And Jesus needs to be in the center of your life. And it's all about loving Jesus by loving people around you and caring. And then some of you have come to a place, or maybe down the road you're looking at a place when you become spiritual parents. And now you're reproducing this in people around you. You're becoming that spiritual parent, and you're raising up other people. And it is a massive change. It's a massive change that is all not about you now. Now it's about others. And you watch them as they begin to move through those same stages that you have. You know, I had an incredible blessing in my life that I really had nothing to do with other than the grace and the mercy of Almighty God. And that was this. I had a godly mother and father. I had a godly mother and father that loved each other on the foundation of Jesus Christ and sought to raise their children on that same foundation. Do you know how priceless that is? How incredibly priceless? That is such a blessing. You know, what I'd like for us to do, I'm gonna ask you to do something that's going to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone, okay? I want us to do this at all of our locations. It's just for a second. Because you see, I think there's some of us that had a godly parent or godly parents that spoke into our lives and shared Christ with us and modeled Christianity in front of us. And then I think there are some of us here, maybe a lot of us here at all of our locations that didn't have that you're kind of the pioneer in your world of Christianity. Like you're the first one to step out and have this relationship with Christ. And you really didn't have anybody that was in your family that was a mom or a dad or a grandparent that discipled you. Okay? If you're a person like me who had somebody that mentored you in your life spiritually that was in your family, would you just do me a favor, all of our locations, and just take a moment and stand up? Okay, now that's about half. It's about half. You can sit down. You see how incredibly important this is? Because there's about half of us in this room. I would imagine those of you that stood up at our other locations, if you would have looked around or taken a moment to look around, about half of you didn't stand up. That means that there's a bunch of us in these rooms of worship that are having to figure this out all by ourselves. And that just stinks, okay? Because it is so much easier to develop emotionally and psychologically and spiritually when you have someone there lifting you up, building you up, discipling you, explaining things to you, helping you along. It is so much, those of you that didn't stand up, isn't it true how hard it's been to try to figure these things out yourself? And not to have anybody else around you. This is why it's so critical that we raise up in our bodies of believers spiritual parents that will take on other people and help to disciple them along and be long-suffering and patient with them as they move forward into those various stages of maturity. Because a lot of people don't get to have that in their families. You know, I remember seeing the same thing happen in 1992. I see Dick Thompson out there. I think that was when John Trent spoke at the what was the Hoosier Dome that became the RCA Dome that is now the Lucas Oil. Yeah. And there were 65,000 men in that dome. And he talked about Abraham, and he talked about the blessing. And he talked about having a parent that built this into to their male children or to their children. And he said, how many of you, he asked the opposite, how many of you didn't get the blessing? And more than half of those men stood up. More than half of them. He's written a book now called The Blessing. It's about that. It just came out not too long ago. And it's a very powerful thing. But you know what? Even though some parents have blown it, spiritually speaking, that doesn't mean that we as a church have to, right? We can step up and we can fill the gap. We can fill that gap for people that so desperately need it. Trying to figure out life and trying to figure out God without discipleship is a very difficult thing. But we can do it if we raise up people that'll act as spiritual parents. Now that can't be just the pastor of a church, because there's hundreds, even thousands of people, and you can't effectively do that. It'd be like having a family with 200 or 500 children in it. I mean, what kind of a parent could you be if you had that many kids? So what we have to learn how to do is how to be that. How do we become the disciplers that God wants us to be? And is that really a good goal? Listen, discipleship is multiplication through reproduction. This is what happens. Discipleship is multiplication through reproduction. It actually goes back to God's original plan before sin entered the world. When God first created the world, and he created it good, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, do you know what he said to his offspring? Do you know what he said when he said, let us make man in our image after our likeness? After he did that, this is what he said: be fruitful and multiply. Right? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. That was God's plan for mankind, to do that. And God's plan for mankind, spiritually speaking, is to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. It's God's plan of the ages. Now, multiplication is different than addition. We all know that from a math perspective, but I want you to think about it from this standpoint. You know, like I said before, we don't have these huge, gigantic families with hundreds and hundreds of kids in it. We just have a few, you know. Some of us may not have any children. Some of us may have just one or two or three. In my family, I have 4. Allison and I have 4 children. Multiplication works with smaller numbers, but it has far greater effects. When you look at what Jesus did, he had 3 years of ministry. How critical were those 3 years? I mean, you think about it. Just 3 years, not very long. From the time he was 30 to 33, Jesus had that window of opportunity to impact an entire world. And do you know what? He spent more than half of that 3-year period just with 12 men. Because he discipled them. That's why he called them his disciples. It may work in much smaller numbers, but it has far greater effect. Far greater effect. Because if you're raising up disciples who become disciplers, who then raise up other disciples who become disciplers, that's multiplication. Instead of addition, it's multiplication. Let me give you an example. This week, I'm in my office. I'm thinking about Nathan Rector, okay? He's on the other side of the country now. And so I called him up. We've been trying to connect last couple of days and hadn't. I got a hold of him. How are you doing? And we did all the pleasantry stuff. I'm fine, you're fine, right? I started sharing with him some of the stuff that God's been doing in my life lately. You know why? Because I'm excited about it. I'm excited about how God is changing me. And because I've been discipling him, and I discipled him for 7 years when he was here on staff, I want to share that with him. Even though he's on the other side of the country, I still want to disciple him. I want to pour into him. And I want to share what God's doing in my life. And you know what happened? In the course of that conversation, it was exactly what he needed to hear. He was dealing with an issue, and he was in a quandary. Gone home the last 2 days, and he was like, I don't even know how to pray. I'm dealing with this thing, and I don't. He's got 1,500 people in that church, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And you know what God did through the Holy Spirit? He spoke something to me. My heart yielded to that. It started changing me. I share that with that guy. It's going to change him. And in multiplication, it's going to minister to 1,500 people. From my office, I'm able to minister to 1,500 people by discipling Nathan. Are you getting that? It's pretty amazing. Really amazing. And I can do that with like the guys, all these locations that are out there on the ground, in the field, working the field, touching and ministering to people in their lives and in their hardships and in their difficulties. As I pour into them, or as other people pour into them, and discipleship happens there, then it pours into those, and out of those, some are going to raise up that are going to become disciples, are going to mature into disciples, and then they're going to be pouring that through into other people. So it's people that are investing in people who are investing in people, reproducing what they've learned and how they've lived. That's how it works. In the book of Luke, chapter 6, verse 39 and 40, listen to what Jesus says. It says, he also spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. So the disciples that Jesus raised up were trying to become like him. As they saw him, they saw God in him. They tried to emulate that in their lives. I'm trying to emulate that in my life. People pour into me, I pour into others, all what we see in Jesus. That's what discipling is all about. We can reproduce what we've learned and experienced. Now, I want to stop right there, because you know what? We all do that anyway. We all do that anyway. We all reproduce what we've learned and what we've experienced. How many of you have heard that if parents were alcoholics, the children stand a far greater likelihood of becoming alcoholic? How many of you have heard that? That's right. Why is that? Because we reproduce what we live and learn. We reproduce it. It's the example that was in front of us. And so whether or not we want to be that way, we have to learn our way out of doing that, because our tendency, our human nature, is to want to reproduce what we've lived and what we've learned, what's happened around us. So it's really important that we reproduce Christ, that Christ becomes that centerpiece of our hearts and our lives, and we reproduce that. So discipleship is multiplication through reproduction. It goes back to God's original plan. It works in smaller numbers, but it has far greater effects. And we reproduce through it what we've learned and what we've lived. Second thing is, discipleship requires intentionality. You got to be intentional about discipleship. Discipleship doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. Now, there may be some weird people in here. I'm looking at you, and that's probably true. Okay? But there aren't very many of you that are married in here or at any of our locations that just stumbled into a great marriage. If you have a great marriage, I am willing to bet you that you fought for it. I'm willing to bet you that you've worked hard for it. Why don't you say it? That's right. It's worth, now, and listen to me. A good marriage is worth fighting for. It's worth fighting for that kind of thing. If you have a great family, I don't think it just happened. I think you had to work for that, study for that, and fight for that in order for that to actually happen. And if you want to be a good disciple, or you want to raise up disciples around you, it's going to require intentionality. It's not going to happen by accident. You're going to have to be intentional about letting it happen in your life and making that happen in another person's life. It's going to take this: big time commitment, big time priority shifting, big time accountability, big time communication, big time modeling, big time discipline, big time patience. It's just like when you changed from being married to being parents. Everything just goes up exponentially, and it's worth it. Now, you're going to agree with me. Every parent in here is going to agree with me. A lot of stuff can happen in your life, and you can manage it. When stuff happens with your kids, it knocks you out right at the knees, doesn't it? You can't manage that one because of all those other investments that you've made, because it's that serious, it's that important. And it can be really frustrating to be a parent. And I'm going to take the other side, okay? It can be really frustrating being someone a parent is raising. Because you just can't understand why they don't get it. You just can't understand why they can't understand simple logic, and you've made it clear, but for some reason mom or dad, they just don't get it. It can be very frustrating on both sides. And so we have to contend for this. We have to fight for this, to stay in it together. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, and verse 11, it says this. And you can hear it in the Hebrew writer's voice. Listen, concerning him we have much to say, but it is hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. Can you imagine saying this to your kids? Have you said this to your kids? Maybe you didn't use those words, but do your ears even work? Did you hear what I said? Yeah. You become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God. I have gone over this time and time again. Why don't you get this? Parents, have you ever said that? This is exactly what the Hebrew writer's saying. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. Would you quit acting like a child and start growing up? For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. You're acting like a child. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. This is what happens. It can be really frustrating to do discipleship, but it's worth it. And we have to give each other places to play. Okay? You can't just, you probably remember what I remember. When my kids were growing up, I said, you can't cross the street without me. You can't cross the street unless I have a hold of your hand. You remember stuff like that? And then there came a day when they could cross the street and they didn't have to hold your hand. And then there came a day when they could cross the street because they learned to look both ways, and you had to trust them that they wouldn't be run over, right? And then there was a day when they said, Dad, can I have the car keys? And there was a day when you walked your daughter down the aisle and you were just praying to God that man would not break her heart. There was a day. But people have to have places to play because life is where you learn this stuff, right? And so, as disciplers, we have to create environments where people that are rising up in maturity have an opportunity to spread their wings and experience what it means to be a follower of Christ. For many of us, listen to me now. I'm going to close up, but for many of us, what I'm talking about right now isn't really fitting because you're going, it's hard for me just to get here. It's hard for me to even consider becoming a part of a small group and making a commitment to that. So your next step probably isn't becoming a spiritual parent. Many of us can't even wrap our minds around that concept. But it's important right now. What is important is you getting a bead on where you are. Where are you right now? Because God is not so concerned about you having all this level 4 stuff down, having all this discipleship stuff down. What he's concerned about is if you're moving forward. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't even be natural for you to be moving way over there right now. If you're here and you have not made a decision for Christ yet, that's what you need to be concentrating on. That's what Jesus Christ wants you to do. He wants you to come into a relationship with him. If you've done that, but you're still isolated, like off to yourself, and you haven't joined others on this journey, which is what God meant for us to do, that's your next step, is to say, okay, I'm going to stretch out, and I'm going to invest my life in others and let them invest in me. If you're to the place where you're ready to make that shift, it's kind of been all about you, but you need to get out of the center of your universe and let Jesus Christ in there, maybe that's your decision. You see what I'm saying? I don't know where you might be right now, but God knows exactly where you are. And it isn't my words that are going to sway your heart. It's going to be his. So what you need to do is you need to listen. You need to listen with your heart to God speaking to your heart. And if he is telling you what that next step should be, then you need to be moving in that direction. We're coming to a time of decision.